Hello and welcome to Catholic Answers Live. I am Cy Kellett, your host. It is Thursday. That usually means open forum, and today is no exception. Today, open forum, 2 hours. If you have a question about the Catholic faith, if there's something that maybe you've been wondering for a long time about why do Catholics believe that or why do Catholics do that, you're welcome to ask, whether you're Catholic or not. Maybe there's somebody in your family who needs some help answering a particular question, or maybe there's somebody at work. You'd like to be able to have an answer for them. Something about the Sacraments, something about the moral teaching of the Church, something about the dogmas of the Church, the Bible. It's all welcome. And our number is 888-318-7884. That's 888-318-7884. Get in line now because the lines do tend to fill up when we have Jimmy Akin here with us, and that is our guest today, Jimmy Akin, senior apologist here at Catholic Answers, and the man you probably know from Jimmy Akin's Mysterious World, the internet phenomenon called Jimmy Akin's Serious World. Hey, Jimmy.
How's it going?
Really, really good. Really good. How's things over at Jimmy Akin's Mysterious World?
They're going well. We have a new episode that's set to drop tomorrow, and I'm trying to remember what it is. It'll come back to me.
Yeah, well, it's a little bit weird here at Catholic Answers because what we do is answer people's questions via internet and phones and all that, and everything's down today.
So I know. It's as I mentioned before the show, it's like a sci-fi remake, The Day Catholic Answers Stood Still, because all our internet's down, our phone is down. Yeah. People have been like having to clean their offices.
Oh, this is sad, isn't it? Isn't that sad, having to clean? You didn't do that, Nick, did you? You didn't bother to clean your office today, did you? Did you?
Yeah.
Oh, Nick, you're all right.
But they prioritized getting internet back and phone back at least for the radio department so that we could have a show for people today.
Yeah, so if the show...
Didn't want it to be a no-show.
If the show suddenly stops, then it's likely that it's something electronic. Nothing happened to us.
Oh, I know what tomorrow's Jimmy Akin's Mysterious World is. It's about the dead hand.
Is that the mafia?
Nope. It's the Soviet doomsday machine that they really built. So
the Black Hand was the mafia.
That could be.
Yeah, I think
I don't know about the Black Hand, but I do know about the dead hand, also known as perimeter. It was a semi-automatic doomsday device that the Soviets actually built. So. You want to learn about Soviet tomorrow? Yeah, this week's episode. Every Friday, I have a new episode of Jimmy Akin's Mysterious World, and this time we're talking about real-life doomsday machines, one of which the Soviet Union actually built.
Just between you and me, did it work? Did they destroy the world?
Well, it hasn't been triggered yet.
Okay.
But
I'm glad to hear the world is still there.
It's sitting there and it's still active.
I gotta. What time does that post? I think I'll be waiting
in the morning.
Nate in Dallas is our first caller listening on Guadalupe Radio. Are you ready to go to callers, Jimmy?
Yeah, sure.
All right, Nate, your question for Jimmy Akin.
Hi, good afternoon. Thanks for taking my call.
Happy to.
My question is, first, are canonizations considered infallible? And second, has the Catholic Church ever canonized a non-Catholic, like a Protestant, a Jew, or a heretic? Because Constantine the Great waited until the last minute and then got baptized by an Arian, which kind of suggests that he was an Arian himself or a heretic, even after the first council. Anyway.
All right.
So in regard to the first question, the issue of whether saint canonizations are infallible is something that there's a difference of opinion among theologians over. The common opinion, and this includes folks at the Vatican, is that they are infallible. And so that is in some quarters, that's the standard assumption. And if that's the case, then that means saint canonizations are by far the most common type of infallible statement the Church makes, because the Church has way more saint canonizations than it has other infallible teachings coming out. So it's a very interesting question, and I deal with it briefly in my upcoming book, Teaching with Authority, which should be out in about a month. This is like at the printer now, or going to the printer. It's right there. Should have it back soon. Other theologians, though, have questioned this and said that it doesn't seem, the question of did someone die in a state of grace doesn't, this is the claim, doesn't seem to be something that falls within the Church's primary or secondary object of infallibility. This is a distinction that theologians make between the kinds of things that the Church can infallibly define. Something is within the primary object of infallibility if it is something that's divinely revealed. So like the Trinity, that's divinely revealed, so that's within the Church's primary object of infallibility, the things that God gave the Church the gift of infallibility primarily to declare divine revelation. But there are also certain other things, the terminology varies for them a little bit, but sometimes they're called dogmatic facts, which are not themselves divinely revealed, but they're related to dogma in that it's necessary, the Church needs to be able to infallibly define them as well in order to properly protect and explain the contents of divine revelation. So an example of a dogmatic fact that the Church could infallibly define, if occasion arose, would be that Trent was a genuine ecumenical council.
Oh, okay.
So it's not divinely revealed. It's not part of the deposit of faith from Jesus and the apostles that Trent, which would occur 1,500 years later, would be an ecumenical council. That's something that's not revealed, but it is potentially necessary to define that Trent was an ecumenical council in order to protect the dogmatic definitions about revelation that Trent made. And so the ecumenicity of Trent would be an example of a truth belonging to the secondary object of infallibility. So the Church could define it even though it's not itself divinely revealed. And the question is then, if the secondary object of infallibility extends only to those things that are necessary for being able to properly explain and defend divine revelation, is the fact that this individual person died in a state of grace, is that really necessary to defend or explain some item of divine revelation that's been with us since the time of Christ? And theologians who would defend the infallibility of saint canonizations would say, yeah, in some way it is. Those who would challenge the canonicity of the infallibility of saint canonizations, like, for example, Cardinal Avery Dulles did, would say it doesn't seem clear why that fact would be necessary, the way like Trent was an ecumenical council would be necessary. So that's probably more on that than you might have imagined you'd get. In terms of have there ever been any non-Catholics canonized? Nobody who has, the Church isn't in the business of canonizing people who aren't Catholic. That would kind of send the wrong signal, because the Church, wants to emphasize that God does want you to be Catholic, and so holding non-Catholics up as examples, even though they may personally be in heaven, holding them up as public examples would create confusion on the part of people about should you become Catholic or not, and so the Church doesn't canonize non-Catholics. But there is a kind of exception that gets made. When the Church reunifies with a group of Christians who have been outside of communion for a while, if that community has itself canonized people, then the people it canonized while it was separate will be recognized still after reunification with the Catholic Church is achieved. Now, that doesn't mean the Pope is not going to come out and do a new ceremony and recanonize them, but the Church will honor canonizations that were made during the time of separation.
That was a lot, Nate. I hope that was helpful to you.
And also, Constantine is not considered a saint in the Catholic Church, though he is in some Christian communities.
Fair enough. Nate, I hope that was helpful to you. Jimmy's book, it's kind of a perfect question to start off with because it's almost time for Jimmy's book to come out, Teaching with Authority. The subtitle on that is How to Cut Through Doctrinal Confusion and Understand What the Church Really Says. It's a very reasonably priced book, but it's also You can pre-order it at a very reasonable price at shop.catholic.com, but it's also on sale right now. So you get an extra 20% off because hundreds of items are on sale during our fall sale right now. You just go to shop.catholic.com, put in the promo code CALive18 when you check out, and you will get that 20% savings on your order. Shop.catholic.com, CALive18 at checkout, and you will start saving.
This is Harry Connick Jr., and you're listening to Catholic Answers Live.
I'm Jeanette DeMello, Editor-in-Chief of the National Catholic Register and co-host of Register Radio with Matthew Bunson. Join us every week as we talk with the Register's expert writers and editors about the news you need to know and offer authentic Catholic insights on the important stories that impact your life. Register Radio, every Saturday at 7 p.m. Eastern and Sunday at 11 a.m. Eastern, here on EWTN Global Catholic Radio.
Do you love sharing the gospel and want to learn to be more effective? Join the St. Paul Street Evangelization online School of Evangelization. You will learn to build bridges of trust and make disciples by befriending strangers, proclaiming the gospel, inviting people to the church, and praying with others. We'll ask for a pledge of financial support, but if you are unable to give, we'll give you a membership at no cost. Find out more and get involved today at streetevangelization.com. That's streetevangelization.com.
Welcome back to Catholic Answers Live, Open Forum. Jimmy Akin, our guest this hour. We go now to Mike in Denver, Colorado, listening on 1060 AM. Mike, your question for Jimmy.
Hey, thanks for taking my call, Jimmy. I had a question that came up. Is purgatory for venial sins only? I guess another way to say that is it possible to go to purgatory, if with mortal sin?
It's not possible to go to purgatory if you die in a state of mortal sin. If you die in a state of mortal sin, then you're going to go to hell. So that doesn't mean, though, that you don't have remaining consequences of a mortal sin, even though the sin's been forgiven and you're no longer in a state of mortal sin. It's kind of like, let's suppose, and this isn't a mortal sin usually, but let's suppose a kid is being reckless, throwing rocks and breaks somebody's window, and then realizes, oh man, that was so stupid of me, I shouldn't have done that, and sincerely apologizes. Well, the kid may be forgiven, but they're likely to still have to pay for the broken window. And that helps teach them their lesson so that they don't do it again in the future. And in the same way, God allows us to experience consequences that are not always fun from our sins as a way of teaching us holiness so that we improve in our holiness and become more like Him in the future. And purgatory is kind of the final stage of that. So there can be consequences from mortal sins that have been forgiven that we still have to deal with in purgatory. So I wouldn't say that purgatory is only for venial sins. It is for dealing with the consequences, the remaining consequences of any sins, whether mortal or venial, that we still have to deal with. But we do have to die in a state of grace in order to get to go to purgatory and thus, in the end, to get to go to heaven.
Okay. That's perfect. Thank you.
Thank you, Mike. I appreciate that call. It is open forum today on Catholic Answers Live, so if you got a question about the Catholic faith, any question at all, it is welcome. And the number is 888-31-TRUTH. Let's go to John in Canton, Ohio, listening on 94.5 FM Living Bread Radio. John, your question for Jimmy.
Hi, gentlemen. Thank you for taking my call. This is the home of Sister Angelica. In fact, we worked at the same company for a while.
Oh, anyway, she's from Canton, Ohio? Was that what you're saying?
Mother Angelica.
Oh.
Yes, Sister Angelica.
Okay.
Anyhow.
What can we do for you?
My question has to do with the Blessed Virgin Mary. Always had a role in Jesus' life, from, of course, his birth to the descent of the Holy Spirit on Pentecost. Why do you think she wasn't involved with the Last Supper when he instituted the Eucharist?
Well, we're not told everybody who was at the Last Supper. We know that the 12 disciples were there. Presumably, they were not the only ones, though, because it was being held in a private house in Jerusalem that did not belong to any of the 12 disciples. And so, presumably, there were other people there. There was the householder and his family and maybe some household servants. In fact, the servants is probable because the way they got to this house was Jesus told Peter and John to go into Jerusalem and look for a man carrying water in a jar on his head, which was unusual because normally women were the ones who did that. So if they found a man doing that, this was like a prearranged signal. They're to follow this guy back to the householder and say, where's the room that you've prepared for the Lord to come? And so it seems that the Lord had servants to be sending out, and on this day he sent out a male servant to get the water as a sign for Peter and John to be able to find. So there are probably other people there. However, we're not given to understand that Mary was there. On other occasions, we do have indications that Mary was present in Jerusalem, and you could even suppose that she was present for this feast, the Passover, because it was one of the pilgrimage feasts, and so people would come to Jerusalem for Passover. In fact, that's one of the reasons that the Jewish war was so deadly in the AD 60s leading up to the destruction of Jerusalem in AD 70, because the city was swelled to over 1 million people with pilgrims from all over the world who had come to Jerusalem for the feast, and then the Romans encamped around it. And they were all trapped in the city. So we know that loads of people went to Jerusalem for Passover. I would suppose that Mary wasn't there for a couple of reasons. One, Jesus was deliberately hiding the location of where he was celebrating Passover with his disciples. I mean, that's the whole point of the sign with find the guy with the water jar and go follow him back to the home he's going to go to and things like that. Jesus is being deliberately secretive about this, presumably to avoid the Roman authorities or the Jewish authorities from being able to nab him until after he's had a chance to eat the Passover with his disciples. So Jesus' secrecy is one reason Mary wouldn't be there, and then that leads us to the other underlying reason that Mary wouldn't be there, which is this was a dangerous situation. And he, as a son, presumably wouldn't have wanted his mother there. Also, he was going to do things during the course of the meal, like ordain the male disciples priests that could, one could raise questions about, well, what if Mary was there and things like that? What does that mean for women in the priesthood? So he might have even had reasons like that involved. But at a minimum, I would say the secretiveness and a desire to protect his mother were probably reasons that she wasn't there at this very sensitive moment.
That makes sense to you, John?
Yeah, that's pretty good. The man who carried the water was probably an Essene, because they separated themselves from women, and women usually carried the water.
Yeah, there were Essenes in Jerusalem, but that's probably not the explanation here. The Essenes also didn't, contrary to some accounts, they didn't really separate themselves from women, especially in ordinary life. In fact, at Qumran by the Dead Sea, where a lot of Essenes, where they had a commune, it seems, we found women and children in the burial plots there. So the monastic community may have been dominantly male, but we know there were women associated with the Essene movement even there, and probably also more broadly elsewhere. So I think that I think that the real reason the man had the water jar was it was a deliberate sign. And you might even ask, Cy, why would Jesus have gone about this in such a secretive way? Why wouldn't he have just said to Peter and John, go to so-and-so's house and tell them to get set up for the Passover?
I don't think they know Jerusalem that well. They're from the Galilee.
Okay. Well, they've been there at least 3 times a year. And he could tell them, go to this street.
Oh, yeah.
Why arrange an elaborate sign?
I think I know.
Okay.
Judas was one of them.
Judas was one of them. Judas had agreed to betray him to the authorities, and
Yeah.
by keeping everyone in the dark, even the 12, until the last minute,
Yeah.
Judas wouldn't know where to tell the authorities to go.
John, that was a very that brought some interesting conversation. Appreciate that call, John. Let's go to William in New Jersey, listening on the Catholic Answers app. William, thanks for downloading the app onto your phone. Your question for Jimmy.
Hi, Jimmy.
Howdy.
Thank you for taking my call.
Happy to.
I need your help in terms of explaining to my Protestant brother what's the benefit of doing a funeral mass for my dad, as he's very sick right now. We're making some arrangements.
You mean doing a funeral mass after your father passes?
As part of, he's going to pass probably in the near future, and my family wants to do a funeral mass for him
after he dies.
The burial.
Uh-huh.
And he doesn't want to do that.
Okay. The benefit is it's a way of praying that God will bless your father even in the afterlife, that we have things that that we've done in this life that have consequences, and those can carry into the next life. That's something that we see, for example, in the second book of Maccabees, where Judah Maccabee, now this isn't in the Protestant Bible, but it does illustrate how this practice has been a Jewish practice since before the time of Christ, and therefore it's been part of the Jewish and Christian tradition since before the time of Christ. Judah Maccabee and his men find the bodies of some soldiers who were wearing superstitious amulets and fell in battle, and even though they died fighting for God, they had some lingering consequences because of their sin, and so Judah Maccabee arranged for a sacrifice to be offered for them in Jerusalem, and that's the Old Testament equivalent of the sacrifice of the Mass. So there's a parallel there, but also if you look in 1 Corinthians 3, Paul indicates that how we when we stand before God in judgment, how we've lived our lives can have consequences. Even if we're saved, they won't necessarily be pleasant. He talks about how some people, even though they're going to be saved, it'll be like escaping through fire. And so that's one of the reasons the church has used the image of fire in connection with purgatory as a cleansing, purifying fire that removes the impurities that we've carried with us throughout our lives. Now, anytime someone's undergoing a purification, whether it's in this life or afterwards, it makes sense to pray for them. And by saying a Mass for someone, by having a funeral Mass, it's a way of asking God, as a church and as family and as people who loved your father, it's a way of praying for God to bless your father and to speed him on his way to heaven, even in the afterlife.
William, what do you make of that?
No, that's great. Thank you. Maybe one small follow-up. Is there any difference and benefit in the funeral Mass versus, let's say, a year later we do, a remembrance Mass?
One of them is sooner, but one of them is sooner, but that's the difference. The Mass is the Mass, and they're both occasions of to pray for your father once he passes, and so I would say, the sooner you pray for him in the form of the Mass, the better. But there's no reason to only have one. You could have an annual memorial Mass if you wanted for your father. That's fine too. And, of course, since you mentioned he's sick right now, I want to encourage the listeners to be sure to pray for your father and for all who are preparing to meet the Lord and for all those that they leave behind.
William, was your father a Catholic at one time?
Yeah, he definitely is. He still is.
Oh.
When my brother became a Protestant.
I see. So it's your brother that doesn't want to do the Mass for your father.
Yeah.
I would also say if Dad's a Catholic, this is how we do things as Catholics. We want to honor our father's wishes.
Yeah, no, my brother's arguing that because he had gone to my brother's services a few times that he's no longer Catholic. But my dad, he has received communion. He goes to confession.
Yeah, well, then I would tell your brother, look, Dad's gone to confession. He's receiving communion. Respect his wishes as he prepares to meet the Lord, and let's love each other and set these issues aside.
Yeah, and that's maybe one last comment. The other thing I'm struggling is how much to push on this, because he's very adamant about it. And I don't want to have problems in the family as well.
Yeah, it's unfortunate. There are when someone is dying is when it puts a lot of stress on families, and there can be things that get said that linger and cause deep wounds that will last for a while. So it's I would be as loving and as gentle as possible, while also being firm about your father's wishes, and pray about the situation. Hopefully avoid a family rupture.
William, thank you very, very much. It's open forum today on Catholic Answers Live. 888-31-TRUTH is the number. Back with more after this.
Catholic Answers Live.
Did you know that all of the books, booklets, DVDs, and CDs that Catholic Answers publishes can be found as close as your neighborhood Catholic bookstore? Catholic Answers proudly partners with hundreds of Catholic bookstores across the nation and the world to bring you quality resources in the areas of apologetics and evangelization from a name you know you can trust. So stop on in and give your local Catholic bookstore a visit and see what they've got that's new from Catholic Answers. You can also find us online at shop.catholic.com. We're Catholic Answers, the most trusted name in Catholic apologetics.
A generation ago, Christian parents didn't have to worry about how to explain transgenderism to their 9-year-old or help their teenager deal with mockery at school for believing in traditional marriage. But today, as our culture's moral center continues to fly apart, and with every form of deviance publicly aired and celebrated, we have no choice but to equip our kids to understand about such issues. In Made This Way, How to Prepare Kids to Face Today's Tough Moral Issues, Layla Miller and Trent Horn give parents the crucial tools and techniques to form children with the understanding they need, appropriate to their age and maturity level, to meet the world's challenges. Silence can no longer be an option. If we're not teaching our children how to understand tough moral issues, then the world will. Read Made This Way and learn how to give your kids a firm foundation on which to build a life of moral clarity and happiness. Order your copy of Made This Way today by calling 1-888-291-8000 or logging on to the shop at Catholic.com.
What was the most challenging thing about your childhood?
Obstacles become defining things for us in our behavior and character as adults.
Let's discuss this on tomorrow's Take Two with Jerry and Debbie.
Now back to more of Catholic Answers Live.
I love hearing Jerry and Debbie saying, now back to Catholic Answers Live. Jerry, former host of Catholic Answers Live. Catholic Answers Live, right. He and Debbie do Take Two now, a great show on all over the EWTN radio network. That's kind of nice to hear him saying that.
That's really generous, because some hosts would feel threatened by the original host saying, now back to Catholic Answers Live.
Well, see, the thing is, I know he really likes working with Debbie, so I don't think he's going to try to come back.
So he's not coming back to Catholic Answers Live in that sense.
Yes, right.
Okay. So you feel safe for now.
Yes, I feel like it. Right. If any of these former hosts were like, I want to come back, I would not feel safe. But since they all are on to other things, I'm like, okay, it's all right. And Jerry's a good man.
And I'm just funning you anyway.
Yeah. Andy in San Antonio, listen on Guadalupe Radio. You are up next. Your question for Jimmy Akin.
Hi, thanks for taking my call. My question is about intercessory prayer. I think I'm saying that right.
Yep.
My brother's an atheist. I pray for him. I know my parents pray for him, and kind of just get your thoughts on how God's going to take all that into account when my brother's being judged before him.
Well, we can't pray that a person who dies outside of God's friendship, our prayers won't if someone said, made a fundamental choice, say, I don't want to be with God in the afterlife, God's going to respect that, and our prayers will not change that. But what our prayers can do in this life is we can ask God to give additional graces to your brother that will hopefully lead him to embrace God, either hopefully consciously and explicitly before he dies, but if not consciously and explicitly, at least on some deep level, so that even if he never experiences a conversion to God outwardly in this life, that he may nevertheless on some deeper level be responding to God's grace, so that he doesn't die having definitively excluded God from his life. When we pray for someone who's in this kind of situation, what we're generally asking for is that God help them in this life come to him, preferably outwardly, consciously having a conversion, but if not, at least inwardly having a conversion where he's open to God on some level, even if it's not fully manifested the way one would want. Then, after the person dies, you can still pray that God would give him graces in this life, because God's outside of time. He can apply your prayers wherever they're needed. But you can also pray at that point, or now for that matter, for the same reason, you can pray that assuming that your brother did die in God's friendship, whether he was outwardly converted or not, that God will smooth his transition into heaven. That if he's in purgatory, that God will help him in that moment of transition or process of transition, and so that he'll be united with God in an even smoother and maybe quicker manner. I want to make the point, God loves your brother even more than anyone else in your family does. So he's going to make sure that your brother gets sufficient grace to embrace God on some level. Whether or not that becomes manifest in an outward visible conversion is something that God doesn't guarantee. But he does guarantee that he'll give every person whom he sent Jesus to die for, he'll give every person the graces that are sufficient to come to him. And then, so the graces that we're praying for are graces beyond what God would give that's sufficient to hopefully make it even easier for the person to come to God.
Okay, Andy?
Yeah, okay. So, just keep praying for him.
Keep praying, brother. That's right.
Yeah.
Thank you very, very much. Let's go to Jordan in Detroit, Michigan, listening on Ave Maria Radio. Jordan, your question for Jimmy.
Hey, guys. Thanks for taking my call. In Luke 8:10, Jesus tells his disciples that the mysteries of the kingdom have been made known to them, and then everybody else, he basically speaks in parables. Mm-hmm. So in the four Gospels, is it true that Jesus only speaks in parables when he's speaking to a broader audience than just his disciples? And then therefore, does that also kind of support that he's even speaking literal to his disciples at the Last Supper when he's talking about his body and blood in the Eucharist?
It's clear that when he speaks in parables, the disciples are often present. The point that Luke is making is that unlike what he would do with other people, he would clarify the parables to the disciples in private. So we see him doing that with the parable of the sower. He proclaims the parable of the sower to the crowds, and then he comes back and tells the disciples, okay, so the sower is the one preaching the word of God, the seed is the word of God, the soils are these different types of people, and so forth. So he would explain the parables to the disciples, but I think it would be a stretch to say that Luke 8:10 means that he explained every single parable he ever told to the disciples in private. We can see an example of that where he initially tells them, beware of the leaven of the Pharisees. And it's only when they misunderstand him that he says, come on, guys, are you really that slow? I'm talking about their doctrine. He from the way the text is written, we would would be reasonable to infer that the only reason he explained that parable is because they didn't get it. And so he used figures of speech with them even in private, and because they misunderstood it and were having this kind of debate among themselves, he felt the need to step in and clarify. So I don't think we can say that he for sure never used figurative language with them in private, or that if he did use figurative language, he always explained it. Figurative language is something that is such a part of human speech that much of the time we're not even aware of the degree to which our language is figurative. We just use metaphors and things that just slide right by people, and they understand them without even thinking about the fact that was a metaphor. Like the one I just used when I said metaphors slide right by people. Metaphors are not physical objects capable of sliding by people, but you knew exactly what I meant. And so I would say that the fact Jesus didn't explain the Eucharist in other terms and say, come on, guys, I'm talking symbolically here, I think that is a valid argument. I don't think, though, that you could use Luke 8:10 to lock that down. I think there are other passages that are better to lock that down with, like John chapter 6, where in the Bread of Life discourse, he's repeatedly questioned on this point. And rather than saying, come on, guys, I'm talking symbolic, he re-stresses the point and actually ramps up the language he's using.
Awesome. Thank you, guys.
All right, Jordan. Thank you very, very much. 888-31-TRUTH, the number. Jimmy Akin, our guest this hour. Next hour, we expect Father John Trigilio to be here. So you got 2 hours.
It's nice to live in hope.
We do live in hope. Oh, you slid that right by me, Jimmy. Tyler in Illinois, listening on the Catholic Answers app. Thanks for downloading the app onto your phone. Tyler, your question for Jimmy Akin.
Yeah, so I'm not Catholic, but I listen to you guys every day.
Awesome.
And I have a Muslim friend that me and him were talking, and it's about the thoughts in your head. According to him, as long as you don't act them out, as long as you don't physically do them, it's still okay and considered, I guess, a good deed. But like in Matthew, it says, "But I say to you, whoever looks at a woman to lust for her has already committed adultery with her in his heart." Now, I want to get your guys' opinion on how far is too far of either thinking or doing, or how does that work?
Merely having a thought occur to you does not constitute sin. And even having some feelings of attraction in connection with a sinful thought doesn't make it a sin. That's just temptation. Where something becomes a sin is when your will is engaged, where you, as an act of the will, endorse the sinful thought. And you can endorse it by your will in more than one way. One way is by physically acting it out. So let's say you have the thought of committing adultery with a woman, and you, as an act of the will, say, yeah, I'm going to go for this. And you seduce the woman and you physically act out the adultery with her. Well, okay, the moment you turned by an act of the will to pursue this course of action, that was the moment it became a sin rather than just temptation. But there are other ways you can use your will without physically acting out a sin. For example, in the same situation, and this is what Jesus is talking about, if you look at a woman and the thought of having sex with her occurs to you, that's not a sin. Even if you have sexual desire for her, that is not a sin. That's just temptation. But when you say, I know what I'm doing is wrong, but I'm going to sit here and fantasize about having sexual relations with her so I can experience the pleasure of that. That's when your will has become engaged, and that's when, as Jesus says, you've committed adultery with her in your heart. And so that's why it is sinful in that case, even though you didn't act it out, because you did nevertheless willfully not just inadvertently or, kind of when you're waking up and distracted and sleepy and all that stuff, but willfully saying, I'm going to do this. That's when it became a sin, even though it was an internal act rather than an external act that you said, I'm going to do this about.
Is that clear to you, Tyler?
Yes, sir. That's exactly my thought on it as well.
Yep. You have a good understanding, and you may not be Catholic, but we are in agreement on this one. And keep listening, and thanks for calling in.
Definitely. Thank you.
Okay. Sure thing. Call in again.
Hey, if you want to know about demons and deliverance and discerning, we got a free ebook we want to give you. As a matter of fact, it's called Demons, Deliverance, and Discernment, and you just get the book free when you go to our Catholic Answers Facebook page and sign up. We're going to send you this free, well, it'll be in ebook form, a free ebook on Demons, Deliverance, and Discernment. Get it now by going to our Facebook page. You just go to Facebook, you put in the words Catholic Answers. We're usually the one that pops up first. Go to that page, and you can get your free ebook right now.
Catholic Answers Live.
Are you a coffee drinker? If so, you can now enjoy a coffee roasted to perfection by the Carmelite monks of Wyoming. Delicious Mystic Monk coffee is roasted and prepared by monks in a hidden cloistered monastery and is available in over 25 varieties. All Mystic Monk coffees are works of perfection and labors of love. For more information on how to purchase Mystic Monk coffee, visit mysticmonkcoffee.com. That's mysticmonkcoffee.com.
Catholic radio, I believe, is the greatest tool for evangelization that the church has today. And I know this because we hear from people all over the world that tell us all the time they came to faith in Christ, in the Catholic Church, through Catholic radio. Guy that lives right next door to you, he might not ask you about your Catholic faith, but he'll ask us. He'll call in and say, tell me about the Catholic Church.
Dr. David Anders thinks Catholic radio is important. So should you.
Welcome back to Catholic Answers Live, Open Forum. Jimmy Akin's still here with us till the top of the hour, so I want to get to as many questions as I can. Let's go to Lisa in Omaha, Nebraska, listening on Spirit Catholic Radio. Lisa, your question for Jimmy.
Can you hear me?
Yes, what's your question?
Okay, my question is, I was listening to you talk earlier about purgatory, and that no one who has committed a mortal sin would be able to enter purgatory or eventually heaven through purgatory.
Unless you've repented.
And something occurred to me, and it was, let's say somebody decided that they wanted to confess their mortal sin, and they determined they need to do this, and on the way there they got in a car accident or something, and were not able to do that.
This is a very common question. The answer is that God is aware of the person's desire to confess the sin, and he does take that into account. In order for the person to be reconciled with God, they need to have, prior to going to confession, they need to have what's called perfect contrition. Contrition is sorrow for sins, not the emotion sorrow, but but basically another way of saying repentance. So you've turned your will away from the sin, said that was bad, I wish I hadn't done that. It's called perfect because, not because it's the perfect in degree, it's like not the most intense regret of the sin, but it's the perfect kind of regret. It's perfect in kind because it's based on the love of God. So if you recognize God is infinitely good, and my sin was contrary to his goodness, and I wish I hadn't done it, I want to do what God wants because he's infinitely good, then you have perfect contrition, and you're reconciled with God even before you get to the sacrament. So you still need to go to the sacrament if you have the opportunity. So if you're not killed in the car accident, then you need to go to confession as soon as you get out of the hospital, I guess.
I was going to say, you don't have to drag yourself there.
But you would already be reconciled with God by the perfect contrition. And so if you were killed on the way to confession and you had perfect contrition, then you would die in a state of grace and you'd go to heaven anyway. So I hope that helps.
Thanks, Lisa. We appreciate that call. Anonymous in Louisiana, listening on Catholic Community Radio. You are up next. Anonymous, your question for Jimmy Akin.
Hey, my question is, if somebody was baptized and confirmed in the Russian Orthodox Church, but not the official, like, Moscow Patriarchate Russian Church, but like a schismatic, like, kind of breakaway catacomb-type church that is in schism from Russia, but technically is still Orthodox in belief and has the same apostolic succession, would their sacraments be valid?
The baptism would certainly be valid. I think you mentioned confirmation as well.
Yep.
I would assume confirmation is going to be valid as well, assuming they have valid holy orders, as you say. In the Catholic Church, there are restrictions about who is allowed to confirm that could in some circumstances invalidate, but since these people are operating outside of the Catholic Church, they're not subject to Catholic canon law, and so the confirmation should be valid as well.
Okay, thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Anonymous. Appreciate it. It is open forum today on Catholic Answers Live, and there are lots of calls, and so I'm just going to keep moving through them. Tommy in New Jersey, listening on Sirius Channel 130, that's EWTN. Tommy, your question for Jimmy.
Thank you for taking my call. I'm a listener every day almost as well, and appreciate
Sure thing. What can I do for you?
as well. Purgatory, just where it comes from, if we find it in the Bible, and
Yeah. So we covered the two basic passages a little bit earlier in the show. I mentioned 2 Maccabees has a passage that indicates that prayer for the dead is a pious thing to do. In fact, it expressly says so. And then also 1 Corinthians 3, where St. Paul indicates that at judgment we're going to find our works are tested by fire, and that even a saved person may see his works go up in flame, and he'll still be saved, but it'll be like escaping through flames. So that's obviously not a fun thing to have happen. He compares it to running out of a burning building. And you're still safe, but it's not fun to be running out of a burning building. And so that shows us how even for the saved, consequences of how we lived our life that are unpleasant can follow us into the afterlife and have to be dealt with there. So those are the basic passages. Those are the clearest ones that I would point to. There are others that have been proposed, but those are the basic ones. If you'd like to read more about all that, I'd suggest going to Catholic.com and typing in the word purgatory, where we have lots of resources for free waiting for you right there online. Catholic.com.
Thanks, Tommy. Thanks very much for that call. Let's go to Al in New York, watching on YouTube. Thanks for watching on YouTube, Al. Your question for Jimmy.
Yeah, my question is, who are the Gnostics and what was their core belief?
The Gnostics were a group of people who lived mostly in the 2nd to the 4th centuries. They spilled over, arguably some kind of early Gnostics may have lived in the 1st century, and then they kind of died out after about the 4th century, but they trickled on for a while. Their core belief was that they had a special knowledge that other people did not have. Sometimes you'll hear them described wrongly as people who believed salvation was achieved through knowledge. That's not really accurate. I mean, we think that too. We think if you know the gospel and accept it and act on it, well, you're going to be saved. So we Christians also think that there's something that you should know that will bring you salvation, namely the gospel. Well, the Gnostics had their own knowledge that they viewed as a gospel, and it was very different than ours. Basically, and there were variations from one group of Gnostics to another, but most of them had in common the view that this world is evil, that it's broken, and it was created by a broken deity, an inferior god that was not the high God. And in fact, they had all these speculations about all these different kinds of gods, all these celestial beings, and the one who made this world was like one of the lowest or even the lowest god, and he was he was messed up, and so he made a messed up world, and that's why we have suffering in the world. But according to the Gnostics, there were individual people, namely themselves, who had a spark of a higher divinity in them, and by realizing this, by coming to know this, you could have your spark of divinity reunited with the higher God and transcend this world. And so that's kind of a description of their core belief. But as I said, there were lots of variations from one group of Gnostics to another.
Okay. Al?
Okay, thank you very much.
Okay.
Sure thing.
All right, thank you, Al. Let's go to David in Eugene, Oregon, listening on 100.5 FM there. David, your question for Jimmy.
Hello?
Hi, David. You're on the air. What's your question?
This is my question. Being a Catholic, reconciliation confession, we go through a priest and we're forgiven in that confessional. I was wondering, the whole other Christian world that do not go through a priest, when they ask God, Jesus directly to be forgiven, are they forgiven their sins the same way we are through that priest? And if that is true, wouldn't it be better, like say for an example, our confessions at our church are Thursday and Saturday, and we commit a mortal sin on Sunday night. Wouldn't it be better if we went directly to Jesus and asked forgiveness for our sin instead of waiting until Thursday if confessions weren't available to us until Thursday?
So we covered the basic principles that go into this a little bit earlier. First of all, it's not the entire rest of the Christian world that doesn't go to confession with a priest. In fact, it's only the Protestant community, and the Protestant community is only about a quarter of Christianity. So actually, it's a minority of Christians that don't use a priest for confession. Most Christians, like 3/4 of them, do. In terms of asking Jesus for forgiveness directly, absolutely we should do that. We should do that as soon as we realize we've committed a sin, we should repent, we should ask Jesus for forgiveness, and then because he did institute this sacrament, we should go to the sacrament as soon as it's reasonably possible for us to do so. But as we covered in a previous call, if you have perfect contrition for your sin, you're already reconciled with God even before you go to the sacrament. So if as soon as you realize you've committed a mortal sin and you say, regardless of the day of the week, and you say, man, that was a mortal sin, I'm so sorry, God is infinitely good and my sin was contrary to his infinite goodness and I want to do what God wants because he's infinitely good, well, then you've got perfect contrition. And then you are reconciled with God from that moment. You still, though, need to go to confession because Jesus instituted the sacrament, so that shows you it's his will, and because you will benefit from the humility of having the act to tell another person what you did, because that requires us to grow in humility. It also makes what we did more emotionally real to us if you have to tell somebody about it. And you will then also benefit by having a validly ordained priest tell you, I absolve you of your sins. So someone who's empowered by Jesus to impart forgiveness to you has done that, and that also makes God's forgiveness more concrete and something that it's easier to have confidence in. When I was Protestant and I didn't have the option of confession and I would, pray to God, I didn't have that assurance because there was no person to tell me who was empowered by God to tell me that I've been forgiven. Instead, I was like trying to twist my mind up into the right shape to ensure I'm forgiven. I often didn't have confidence that I had been. And so there are a lot of benefits to confession, and we, in a way, have the best of both worlds. Through perfect contrition, we can be reconciled with God even before the sacrament, but we also have the comfort of the sacrament when we go to it.
David, you should also say thanks to the priests at your parish. If you have confession twice a week on Thursdays and Saturdays, you have more opportunities than are in most parishes around the country, so that's good of them to offer the sacrament like that. Thanks for that call, David. Thank you, Jimmy Akin,
Thank you, Cyril Kellett.
I don't know. It seemed like a world record how many questions we got through today. I'm going to have to ask Marie.
I don't know. We took a longer time on some of the early ones.
Oh, okay. All right. Fair enough. Well, all our hopes are up. John Trigilio, next hour. We'll see if we're able to make that connection, because things have been crazy around here. We'll see you then, God willing.
Let us help you with your question today on Catholic Answers Live.
A generation ago, Christian parents didn't have to worry about how to explain transgenderism to their 9-year-old or help their teenager deal with mockery at school for believing in traditional marriage. But today, as our culture's moral center continues to fly apart, and with every form of deviance publicly aired and celebrated, we have no choice but to equip our kids to understand about such issues. In Made This Way, How to Prepare Kids to Face Today's Tough Moral Issues, Layla Miller and Trent Horn give parents the crucial tools and techniques to form children with the understanding they need, appropriate to their age and maturity level, to meet the world's challenges. Silence can no longer be an option. If we're not teaching our children how to understand tough moral issues, then the world will. Read Made This Way and learn how to give your kids a firm foundation on which to build a life of moral clarity and happiness. Order your copy of Made This Way today by calling 1-888-291-8000 or logging on to the shop at Catholic.com.
With the recent commemoration of the 50th anniversary of the release of Humanae Vitae, there have been fresh attacks on Catholic teaching from outside and, unfortunately, inside the Church. That's why Catholic Answers thought it critical to provide a vigorous affirmation of Paul VI's prophetic wisdom with our newest book, Inseparable: 5 Perspectives on Sex, Life, and Love in Defense of Humanae Vitae. We asked 5 distinguished contributors to reflect on and defend Humanae Vitae from 5 perspectives, each of them compelling, together forming a mosaic of truth. Don't be caught uninformed when the topic of contraception comes up among friends, family, and co-workers. Order your copy of Inseparable today by calling 1-888-291-8000 or visiting the shop at Catholic.com.
The world is changing. The days of picking up a paperback book or popping a DVD or compact disc in the player have given way to the digital age. The good news is that the shop at Catholic.com has joined the digital revolution. Check out the new digital platform at shop.Catholic.com, where all of our DVDs, books, and audio products are now available in digital form for you to purchase and download at your convenience, anywhere you go. For that matter, anywhere in the world. We've got hundreds of offerings, so visit shop.Catholic.com today and check out our selection. That's shop.Catholic.com.
Have you subscribed to the Catholic Answers Radio Club newsletter? This is Catholic Answers Live host Cy Kellett, and I want to tell you about our new weekly newsletter full of behind-the-scenes information and facts you need to know about the show. It's easy to sign up. Just visit CatholicAnswersLive.com and look for the newsletter sign-up box on the front of the page. It's a great way to keep up to date with what's happening with the show and see what's coming in the days ahead, delivered weekly into your inbox. Sign up today for the Catholic Answers Radio Club newsletter and see what you've been missing. Go to CatholicAnswersLive.com.
Is the Church wrong on contraception? In a culture that worships the pursuit of sexual pleasure, the Catholic Church's teaching on contraception can seem archaic and unintelligible. Its critics say it's outdated, theologically unfounded, and even harmful. And even faithful Catholics can have difficulty explaining this moral teaching. Catholic Answers is out to change all of that. That's why we've just released Trent Horn's dynamic new DVD, The Case Against Contraception. Using scripture, papal and magisterial teachings, natural law, and new insights provided by social science and medicine, Trent puts forward a compelling case for Catholic teachings with his trademark charity and persuasive graciousness. Be prepared to give a defense. Order your copy of The Case Against Contraception today by calling 1-888-291-8000, logging on to the shop at Catholic.com, or asking for it at a good Catholic bookstore near you.
Welcome back to Catholic Answers Live, Open Forum. Father John Trigilio, our guest this hour. And Open Forum means if you have a question about the Catholic faith, about Catholic beliefs, about the Bible, about the sacraments, it's all welcome. Whatever question is on your mind or maybe on the mind of a loved one, you just give us a call, 888-318-7884, and Father Trigilio will address your question, 888-318-7884. Father holds a doctorate in medieval philosophy and a doctorate of theology in biblical studies. He's a member of the Fellowship of Catholic Scholars, and he's been the president for a long time, since 2002, of the Confraternity of Catholic Clergy. Hello, Father Trigilio. How are you?
Fine, I'm fine. I'm also currently the Director of Pastoral Formation at Mount St. Mary's Seminary here in Emmitsburg, Maryland.
Oh, I'm sorry that I forgot to mention that, yeah.
Just in case people are wondering.
Yeah, what's he doing for a day job?
Yeah.
Pastoral formation, that means helping priests develop those skills that they actually need in the trenches when they meet people, when they're...
Yes.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
All right. And do you have a bunch of pastoral young men there now preparing? Or I don't know.
We have 155.
Wow. And how many who are not pastoral? Or
They all have to be pastoral.
Would that be a
we
thing?
have about 22 dioceses represented here.
So would that be a thing that you might end up not ordaining? A bishop might decide, for example, to not ordain a man if he just didn't seem like he could get along with people, or that he wasn't...
Well, yeah, that's one of the aspects that we look at, because we have what they call the four dimensions of development here at the seminary, and one's human formation, one's pastoral formation, spiritual formation, and intellectual formation. And so part of the human formation is you have to get along with other people. So we look at their temperament, how they get along with the other guys, how they get along with people in the parish. So one of the things I do when I assign them to a pastoral assignment is when they're evaluated for how well they get along with other people, if they're balanced. We have them go through psychological examinations. So we observe them in all these areas. So obviously, first and foremost, we want to make sure that they're men of prayer and that they're orthodox in their doctrine, but also that they're normal. We want guys who are not going to be oddballs, and we want people who are mentally, physically, and spiritually healthy. So we look at all four of those things, and then the bishop ultimately makes the decision. But just because a guy thinks he has a vocation, and he may be as brilliant as St. Thomas Aquinas and be as holy as St. Francis of Assisi, but still the bishop has to make that final decision that he feels he can ordain him to the priesthood.
So it's you might feel you have a vocation to marry a particular woman, but that doesn't mean you're going to end up married to her. There's two parties to this.
Exactly, yeah. And some guys, they decide, or the bishop decides, maybe the guy has a vocation, but maybe not a vocation to that particular diocese or religious order. I'm some of the few that we're not in the diocese that we grew up in. A lot of priests now are in other dioceses or in religious orders that they originally grew up in a diocese somewhere else.
Now I just one more question, because there's a lot of people that want to talk to you. We have lots of callers on the line, and if you want to talk with Father Trigilio about anything having to do with the Catholic faith, you can call 888-318-7884. If getting along with people is one of the basics of priesthood, I just want to ask you, could St. Jerome get ordained if he was in a modern seminary, or would that be a problem?
Well, I think they would urge him to become like a hermit, where he could live by himself. And he's one of my favorite saints because I said if he can struggle with his temper and his language, any of us can.
Well, you're a Bible scholar too, and for Bible scholars, Saint Jerome is your patron, right?
Oh yeah. But his temperament and mine are quite similar.
Oh, well, you always seem so jovial and friendly when you're on here. I won't get on your bad
I'm
side.
also Sicilian, so yeah.
Oh, that's right.
You never know.
Okay, so that means there's a blade on you somewhere.
There's always a knife.
888. I hope no one takes offense at that. 888-318-7884. The number. A bunch of callers, Father. You ready?
Yes.
All right, Don in Louisville, Kentucky, listening on AM 1040. Your question for Father John Trigilio. Don, do we have you? Nope. Don's
Hello, Don.
You know what? Let's come back to Don in a second. He may wake up. Sometimes people
might be in telephone limbo.
Yeah. Well, it could be us, too, because we had all kinds of system problems today. Let's try Jeff in Houston, Texas, listening on Guadalupe Radio. See if Jeff's there. Hi, Jeff. Are you there?
Hey, can you hear me?
We can, yes. You have a question?
Yes, we can.
For Father?
Perfect. Thank you, Sai. Hello, Father.
Hello.
Everything you do, you remain in my prayers always.
Thank you.
I had a quick question that my wife and I have had discussion about. Is there a preference towards whom you receive the Eucharist from, whether it's Eucharistic minister or the priest?
Okay, like when you're at Mass?
Yeah, when you're at Mass and you're going up to the altar to receive communion.
Oh, okay.
Maybe there's a Eucharistic minister to the left and the priest in front.
Yes.
My wife always says you should always wait in line to go to the priest. But
well, that's a personal choice. Yeah. Obviously, the people who do go to what we technically call the extraordinary minister of Holy Communion, okay, they're extraordinary because the ordinary minister of Holy Communion is the priest, bishop, or the deacon. Therefore, anyone who's not a member of the clergy, who's not ordained, it would be an extraordinary minister of Holy Communion. And the reason why they're also extraordinary is because they're to be used when there's not enough priests. Now, if someone is duly delegated to be an extraordinary minister of Holy Communion, which means like the diocese will train them, and then the bishop gives a letter saying that they're deputized to be an extraordinary minister of Holy Communion, or the priest may, at the last minute, if he sees there's a huge crowd, he may individually delegate someone. Anybody who receives communion from them, they're receiving validly the Holy Blessed Sacrament, and it's not a sin, it's not a violation of canon law to receive from them, even if the priest abuses the privilege and asks the extraordinary ministers when they're not needed. They're still validly given out Holy Communion. You're still allowed to go to them, even if the priest should not be using them. Because sometimes when pastors will say, well, they're scheduled, and really they're supposed to be there only when there's a necessity. And I would say in many parishes, because of the size, if you've got a couple thousand people and there's one priest giving out communion, okay, but sometimes you might have an instance where if there's a small amount of people who showed up that particular day, then whoever is scheduled for that Mass should, as an extraordinary minister of Holy Communion, should sit down. Too many times I've seen it where they say, well, I'm scheduled. I need it. Well, you're extraordinary. You're only supposed to function when there's a need. But even if that takes place, you're allowed to go to them. Obviously, though, you as an individual can make the choice and say, I want to go to the priest or I want to go to the deacon, which you're allowed to do. You just don't make it seem as if you're avoiding the extraordinary minister of Holy Communion because there's something wrong with them. We don't want that message to be conveyed. But you have the right to go to whatever line you want to go to. So there's nothing wrong with that.
Got it. Thank you. Very helpful. Thanks so much.
Okay. Thank you very much, Jeff. Appreciate that call. Father, I was thinking while you were talking that if you really need to form these young priests, you need to take them to the shrine of St. Padre Pio, because what a priest, right? Wouldn't that be a very formative thing to do?
I'm glad you asked that, because that's exactly what I plan to do.
I know.
Coming March, we're going to run a pilgrimage. Now, last year I had 25 seminarians. We went just to Rome. This coming year we want to take them to Padre Pio, who literally, I mean, I would not be a priest today if it wasn't for the intercession of St. Padre Pio. So we're planning to take 20, 25 guys to see Padre Pio's shrine, also the Holy House of Loreto, Eucharistic Miracle of Lanciano, and then a few days in Rome. If anybody would like to help, because some of these guys don't have much money, although I mean, you can't beat the price. It's only $2,499 for them to go. That includes their airfare, but seminarians are like paupers. They don't have much. So if we can raise enough, maybe just to cut their price in half so we can provide scholarships. Anybody's interested, you can please get a hold of me. My email is trigilio@msmary.edu, or they can get my phone number through Catholic Answers, and if they want to help. Last year we did have some nice donors that enabled some guys to go who normally wouldn't have the opportunity to go. And it's a nice birthday, a Christmas gift, ordination gift.
Yeah.
The guys really, really get a lot out of this.
Yes, let's form these young men for priesthood by sending them to visit the shrine of St. Padre Pio and to make this pilgrimage with Father, because it's a time for them to be together and to really grow in their readiness for the priesthood. So for about $2,500, you can send a guy there. If we have an assistant producer here, Assistant Producer Marie, and I bet if you send her an email, she'll get you in touch with Father. Just send it to radio@catholic.com, radio@catholic.com, and Marie will set you up with Father to get you connected. As a matter of fact, Marie is here now. Marie, what are you here to tell us about?
I am here to talk about Radio Club. We have a new exclusive interview with Tim Staples that is free for you. All you have to do is text Tim Staples, all one word, to 44222. And then you can be a part of our Radio Club community, which is growing and has been so fun to communicate with people. I also want to just say thank you so much to everybody who's signed up to be a parish partner. I've gotten a flood of requests, which is so awesome, to the point where we ran out of supplies. So
that's a good problem to have.
We're reordering, and I should have things in the next 3 or so weeks, and we're getting some really new and cool stuff that we didn't have before. So parish partner people, just hang in there. I'm going to get to you and send you some stuff soon.
All right, and you can always, as I said, get in touch with Marie just by sending an email to radio@catholic.com. She'll be happy to help you with getting in touch with Father John Trigilio to help Father send or bring seminarians on this very important pilgrimage, important for their formation or for anything else having to do with Catholic Answers, whether you want to join Radio Club. And you do want to join Radio Club. Marie made me sit in this studio for like an hour and a half today recording special stuff.
Oh, my goodness.
Yeah, I had to interview Trent Horn. I had to interview Jimmy Akin. It was hard work, and those.
But the topics were so fun.
Yeah, they were good.
You guys are going to love them, but they're not coming out for a little while.
Yeah, they won't.
So you're gonna have to wait.
But you got to be a member of Radio Club to get it. You got to be a member.
What was that text number again?
44222.
And you text the word Tim Staples, all one word, to 44222.
Yep.
We'll be right back with more Catholic Answers Live with Father John Trigilio right after this.
Stay with us for more Catholic Answers Live.
With the recent commemoration of the 50th anniversary of the release of Humani Vitae, there have been fresh attacks on Catholic teaching from outside and, unfortunately, inside the Church. That's why Catholic Answers thought it critical to provide a vigorous affirmation of Pope Paul VI's prophetic wisdom with our newest book, Inseparable: 5 Perspectives on Sex, Life, and Love in Defense of Humani Vitae. We asked 5 distinguished contributors to reflect on and defend Humani Vitae from 5 perspectives, each of them compelling, together forming a mosaic of truth. Don't be caught uninformed when the topic comes up among friends, family, and coworkers. Order your copy of Inseparable today by calling 1-888-291-8000 or by visiting the shop at Catholic.com.
Catholic Answers Live is brought to you in part by CatholicSingles.com, the website for Catholics who want to meet others who share their faith and values for faith, fellowship, and love. You can learn more at CatholicSingles.com. Catholic Answers Live thanks CatholicSingles.com for their generous support.
Homeschool Connections, an online provider of courses for your Catholic homeschool, is a sponsor of Catholic Answers Live. Homeschool Connections website is homeschoolconnections.com.
A generation ago, Christian parents didn't have to worry about how to explain transgenderism to their 9-year-old children or help their teenager deal with mockery at school for believing in traditional marriage. But today, as our culture decays, we have to know how to talk to our children about these issues. In Made This Way, How to Prepare Kids to Face Today's Tough Moral Issues, Layla Miller and Trent Horn give parents the crucial tools and techniques to form children with the understanding they need, appropriate to their age and maturity level to meet the world's challenges. If we're not teaching our children how to understand tough moral issues, then the world will. Read Made This Way and learn how to give your kids a firm foundation on which to build a life of moral clarity and happiness. Order your copy of Made This Way today by calling 1-888-291-8000 or logging onto the shop at Catholic.com.
It's the start of a new day for Morning Catholic Radio.
Isn't it the case that when you're stirring food in a pot, it burns less, because it's not just sitting there?
What about your forearms? You get some nice buff forearms when you're doing that stirring.
But let me say, I can totally get this for you, Gloria. You don't need any help stirring the pot.
You know, you all make it so easy for me.
Morning Glory, Catholic from the start. Weekday mornings, 7 Eastern on the EWTN Global Catholic Radio Network.
Father John Trigilio, you know him from the television, EWTN television. You know him from radio. Maybe you know him in person. If you do, be careful. He's got a temper. But he is here to take questions, any question having to do with the Catholic faith. And I don't think I have stressed this enough today, so let me repeat this. If you're not Catholic, we welcome your call. If you're, if you were raised a Buddhist or a Hindu or nothing at all, you're welcome to call, ask anything you want about the Catholic faith. We'll try to give you as informative an answer as we can. The number is 888-318-7884, 888-318-7884. We go now to Kathleen in Philadelphia, listening on Holy Spirit Radio. Kathleen, thanks for your call. Your question for Father.
Yes, hi. My question refers to if you know somebody and they're obviously having a baby through IVF, how do you handle that? Because I know I've always known in terms of IVF is bad because of the life issue, of course, if you have embryos and then what happens to them and everything like that. But here's, the IVF was obviously successful. What do you do, particularly if you're going to be asked to participate in showers and baptisms and those sorts of things? How do you approach that?
Mm-hmm. Well, I'm glad you asked that because obviously we want to separate the two issues. One is how the baby came to be, and obviously, there are moral means to conceive and immoral means to conceive. And we go back to Humani Vitae of St. Paul VI. Love and life, unity and procreation are the two ends of marriage. So just like contraception violates that principle, so does artificial conception. So artificial contraception and artificial conception are both wrong because it's separating those two aspects. And when you're conceiving a child, which we would used to call test tube babies or and whatnot, the problem is that it's done outside the intimacy of the natural act, the conjugal act of marriage, in which the husband and wife have natural intercourse. Now, once it's been done, obviously, and you point out a good issue too, that not only is the act of in vitro fertilization wrong, but one of the other aspects of it is that they create other embryos that they discard, which we consider an abortion, or they freeze them in perpetuity, which is the equivalent of an abortion. But just the baby himself or herself, once they've been conceived and they're in the mother's womb, you still have to treat them as human beings because that's what they are. So there's nothing that prohibits us from baptizing that baby because, again, that's a human being. And so they would be able to be baptized and receive Holy Communion and confirmation, and they'd be able to be ordained if it was a male child, or become a nun or get married or whatever. So they're not denied any of the sacraments because it wasn't their fault how they were conceived. But we would tell a couple that, that as they're contemplating in vitro fertilization, that's not a good thing. Now, there's other methods that can be used. There's a couple of processes that just have come. It goes beyond the natural family planning. That's obviously something that can always be used to regulate births, but also to if one's trying to have a baby. But there's other methods that can be used that are completely morally acceptable. It's just that this in vitro fertilization, or IVF, as you point out, it's the means, okay? Because the ends doesn't justify the means. But once the baby's conceived and in the womb, you have to treat that baby as you would any other human being.
Okay, Kathleen?
Well, thank you very much. I do appreciate that.
Okay, thank you very much for that call, Kathleen. We appreciate it. Let us go to Colleen, right here in Fallbrook, California, just north of us, listening on the Catholic Answers app. Because we're not on the local radio station. Oh, I get ahead of myself. Thanks for downloading the app. Colleen, your question for Father.
Thank you for taking my call. I have a question about the Liturgy of the Word. It was always my understanding growing up that anywhere you go in the world, you're going to hear the same readings in the Catholic Church every day. And that hasn't been in my experience here in the United States. I watch the Mass on television every day, and very, very often the readings have been changed, or sometimes the collect will be the same, but the first reading will be the same, but the gospel is different, or any combination thereof. And I wondered if that could be explained in any way.
Okay, well, that's a good question, because I know sometimes people get confused when there is a discrepancy. And like, for instance, a big one is about the celebration of Ascension Thursday. Here when I'm in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania as a priest of Harrisburg, we still celebrate Ascension Thursday on the 40th day after Easter. Below the Mason-Dixon line, when I'm working here at the seminary, we celebrate on the closest Sunday. So many times people would call in the TV station and say, doesn't EWTN know it's Ascension Thursday? Well, they celebrate it on Sunday because of where they're located geographically. That's why. Now, because they're Franciscan friars who are saying the Mass there, they have a unique Roman Missal, and some of the saints they have are not necessarily on the universal calendar. So if they were Dominicans, they would have Dominican saints that may not be. And some of those Dominican saints, when their feast days arise, there's a particular reading, and maybe the New or Old Testament reading, it might be the Gospel, so that the religious order itself may have some particular readings that are appropriate for that particular feast day. So that often would take the place. Now, there is not in the one time there used to be a number of different lectionaries, where there was a New American Bible translation, there was the Jerusalem Bible, and then the Revised Standard Version. The American bishops, USCCB, codified that so that all the lectionaries are basically the same translation. Now it's the New American Bible. But again, you may have in particular areas celebrations that are unique to that area because of the saint itself, the diocese, because the saint, like for instance, again, my diocese, Harrisburg, St. Patrick is the patronal feast of the patron saint of the diocese. So for us, that would be a full-fledged solemnity, even if it's during Lent, as with the Feast of St. Joseph, which is a universal feast. So the readings that you hear at EWTN are based on that premise, that it's first maybe a Franciscan celebration, or it might be a local selection that's based on the diocese. So it's not that they get to pick and choose which ones they want. It's appropriate to the order or the diocese in which that Mass is being celebrated.
Okay. That's kind of what I surmised, but I wanted to know if that was more or less just acceptable. That I guess it just challenged my view of anywhere you go for any mass, everybody's saying the same thing, but there are so many exceptions.
For the most part, I would say that it's almost 80 to 90% correct. So that most of the time the readings, not only are they the same in the Catholic Church, but we have almost a unified lectionary with many of the Lutherans and Episcopalians as well. They base it on our lectionary, but it's just that 10% maybe or 15% discrepancy that you may notice, and it might just be you hit the days when they have that unique mass going on, but it's still 85% the similarity.
Okay. Well, thank you very much for taking the time to explain that.
Thanks, Colleen. I appreciate it. Father, who decides that? I mean, is there who decides, okay, this Sunday it's going to be this reading, for example?
Well, there's a thing called the Ordo, O-R-D-O, that every diocese and every religious community has, and it determines what the readings are for the Mass of the day, or if there's options. Sometimes the priest, and it's up to the priest himself, if it's an optional memorial, that there may be a reading specific for that if he's going to celebrate that feast, but it's not a mandatory feast, so it's up at his discretion. So I might celebrate, if it's a feast of St. Gunigunda or St. Sebastian, and some other priest might say, no, I'll just do the regular weekday. That's his purview because it's allowed in the Ordo. The Ordo states the feast for each day and the readings, but it's particular to each diocese or religious community.
Father John Trigilio is our guest. If you're on the line, stay on the line. We're going to get to you. If you haven't dialed yet, 888-31-TRUTH is the number. It's open forum. Any question at all about the Catholic faith is welcome. Right back after this on Catholic.
Catholic Answers Live.
A generation ago, Christian parents didn't have to worry about how to explain transgenderism to their 9-year-old or help their teenager deal with mockery at school for believing in traditional marriage. But today, as our culture's moral center continues to fly apart, and with every form of deviance publicly aired and celebrated, we have no choice but to equip our kids to understand about such issues. In Made This Way, How to Prepare Kids to Face Today's Tough Moral Issues, Layla Miller and Trent Horn give parents the crucial tools and techniques to form children with the understanding they need, appropriate to their age and maturity level, to meet the world's challenges. Silence can no longer be an option. If we're not teaching our children how to understand tough moral issues, then the world will. Read Made This Way and learn how to give your kids a firm foundation on which to build a life of moral clarity and happiness. Order your copy of Made This Way today by calling 1-888-291-8000 or logging on to the shop at Catholic.com.
Face it, it's tempting and easy to be a man of the world. Father Terence Ehrman has a challenge for you. Be a man of God instead. In his new book, Man of God, Father Ehrman draws on his experience counseling men who are struggling to live in the world but not be of the world. In a unique, easy-to-read format, he offers holy spiritual direction for all men who want to master themselves and be transformed from within. Order your copy of Man of God today by calling 1-888-291-8000, visiting the shop at Catholic.com, or asking for it at a good Catholic bookstore near you.
What was the most challenging thing about your childhood?
Obstacles become defining things for us in our behavior and character as adults.
Let's discuss this on tomorrow's Take 2 with Jerry and Debbie.
Now back to more of Catholic Answers Live.
I'm going to have to catch that Take 2 with Jerry and Debbie tomorrow. If that's what they're going to be talking about, I got to catch that. Father John Trigilio is our guest this hour. A theologian and Bible scholar and preparer of men for the priesthood. And your call about the Catholic faith is welcome if you have a question you'd like to ask, Father. We go now to Brandon in Texas, listening on Guadalupe Radio. Brandon, are you there?
How are you guys doing?
Very, very well,
Marvelous,
Brandon.
marvelous.
Your question for Father.
Yes, so one of my confirmation students asked me yesterday, can the Pope excommunicate himself? And if so, who lifts the excommunication?
Yeah, I remember teaching CCD, and kids would come up with abuse like that too. That's like the philosophical question: could God create a rock so heavy He can lift it up Himself? And the answer, of course, is it's an oxymoron. It's self-contradictory. Just like God could not sin because sin is going against the will of God, so how could God go against His own will? Likewise, since the Pope is the supreme lawmaker and judge, canonically speaking, there's no way he could excommunicate himself. He could resign, as Pope Benedict did, and then he would no longer be Pope. But the Pope cannot excommunicate himself either by formal decree or by any act that he would do, because he has the fullness, its full, complete, universal power that he has, and that's defined in canon law, also in the Catechism of the Catholic Church, and that goes back even to the First Vatican Council. So the Pope has all that authority. Now, that's separate from his infallibility, which deals with only faith and morals when he speaks ex cathedra. But in terms of canonical legal authority as the supreme lawgiver, there is no higher authority than the Pope. Not even an ecumenical council can overturn a Pope or can depose a Pope. Now, that doesn't mean that the Pope is impeccable. He's still able to sin. Doesn't mean that he's not able to, God forbid, get sick or physically or mentally. That's happened before in the past. But you can't force a pope out of office. When we've had bad popes in the past, like the Borgia and Medicis, and the time when we had 3 popes, claimants to be popes, you had saints who urged them to resign. But sometimes, when you had a very bad pope in the Middle Ages or Renaissance, you just had to pray to Saint Joseph for a happy death, because there was no way you could force him out of office. You could encourage him to resign if he was a decadent, immoral pope. But there's no way that you can force him out, or that he could force himself out, except by a free will, deliberate, intentional act of resignation, as we've seen done before. So that's the Pope can't stumble upon something and then all of a sudden he's automatically thrown out. Now the rest of us, we could be automatically excommunicated if we violate some of the aspects of canon law, because we're under its jurisdiction. But he is above it, because he is the lawgiver as well as the interpreter of that law as a judge.
Brandon, does that all make sense to you?
Yes, I guess it does. So even if the Pope were to commit an excommunicable offense, like leaking information from the Sacrament of Confession or something like that, he's still above the law, so he wouldn't be excommunicated. He'd just be a bad
That is
Pope.
correct. Yes, that is correct, because that's when you've got the full supreme universal jurisdiction, then you are, in a sense, above the law. Okay, now that doesn't mean he's above the moral law. So whatever a sin for us is a sin for him. But in terms of canon law, his jurisdiction as the supreme head of the church, there is no authority higher than him other than God himself.
Thanks, Brandon.
You can't appeal higher than the Pope.
Thank you very much, Brandon, for that question. Father, is that in fact the case of if a priest were to reveal a confession, that he incurs automatic excommunication?
Automatic excommunication for revealing the secrets or breaking the seal of confession, for desecrating the Blessed Sacrament. If a priest tries to absolve an accomplice against the Sixth Commandment, if he does something, a sexual sin, and then tries to absolve his accomplice, then he's excommunicated automatically. And if one lays violent hands upon the Pope, or with abortion, those are the ones that were automatic excommunications. And the most serious, of course, like the priest violating the seal, not only was he automatically excommunicated, but only the Holy See, the Pope, could remit that and absolve that penalty.
I see. Well, I will be careful not to jostle the Pope if I find myself hanging out.
Well, interesting, in the old 17 code, it used to be excommunicatable if you laid violent hands on a priest. But now it's only reserved to the Pope. So my mother told me about one time she was playing cards with her cousin who was an older priest, and she threw a card in his face, and my grandmother freaked out because she was, you got excommunicated.
Oh, come on, it's cards. That's serious business.
Well, that's it. It wasn't violent hands. It was a card.
Sammy in New Mexico, listening on Guadalupe Radio. You are on with Father John Trigilio. Your question, Sammy.
Hi, how are you?
Very good, thank you.
Thanks for taking my call, Father. I was just calling about something I've been hearing recently called healing the family tree. For instance, if you had a grandfather that was a Mason or that kind of thing, you might have that sin follow you and your family, or if you have a tendency, your family has tendency towards depression, or you've had suicide, or you've had divorce in your family, that you need to have a healing and a healing mass. Have you heard of that, and what do you think about that, please?
Yes, I've heard of it, and sometimes people call it generational healing. I really don't think that is in concert with Catholic teaching, though, because you're responsible for your sins. You're not responsible for the sins of your ancestors. And unlike the Mormons that believe that you could baptize the dead who were not baptized, or you could make them Mormons even after death, everything in our Catholic tradition is that it has to occur during life, so that you're responsible for the sins you commit. Now, it's true. There are psychological and physiological characteristics and traits that we inherit from our ancestors, and so someone could have a predisposition to alcoholism or mental illness, but that has nothing to do with sin. Okay, that's a physical phenomenon, but you don't. The only sin that we inherit is original sin, the sin of Adam and Eve. I don't inherit any of the sins of my grandfathers or grandmothers or anybody that's related to me biologically through DNA or otherwise, but I do inherit the sin of Adam and Eve through human nature. But other than that, that's where you would get into this sort of ancestor theology that is more Far Eastern than would be Christian.
Okay. Thank you so much, Father.
You're welcome.
Thank you very, very much for the call. We appreciate it. Boy, Father, there are a lot of people who want to talk to you today, so I will just keep moving here. It is open forum on Catholic Answers Live. David in Virginia, you're up next. Thanks for watching on YouTube, David. Your question for Father?
Hello, Father.
Yes.
You made reference to the top of the program about screening seminarians, about making sure they're spiritually and mentally fit, and that inspired my question because I've always wondered it. And that is, how do you tell the difference between the spiritual and psychological realms, especially within oneself?
I'm glad you asked that because, there is overlap, obviously, because we are a union of body and soul. We're matter and form. It's a hylomorphic concept that, Aristotle particularly, but also Plato, and we see it explained by St. Thomas Aquinas, and it's part of Catholic theology that we're a union of body and soul. We're not souls that are trapped in a body. That being the case, then, the spiritual and the physical, the material, immaterial world coincide, in a sense, within human beings. And we do look at both the spiritual as well as the psychological and then the physiological when we're looking at the seminarians. And they take psychological exams. And I remember when I took mine, we had the old-fashioned Rorschach ink blot, and they had the MMPI, and they had multiphasic. They had all these, what they call the full battery of psychological tests that you would take to get into a military academy, or if you were going to get the national security clearance, a number of vocations and jobs, you would have to go through the same process. So we use that science of psychology to determine if this person has psychological problems or if they're psychologically healthy or not. And then we look at the spiritual, which obviously is distinct, and that's something that a seminarian has two things here at the seminary. One's a spiritual director, a priest who guides him in the spiritual realm, and that's all kept what we call internal form. It's all confidential. Usually that's the guy the seminarian goes to confession to, so that priest can't vote on that seminarian. What he hears in his discussions are kept confidential. But then that seminary also has what we call a formation advisor, and this is a priest who's in the external forum, and whatever they discuss is open material when we have a faculty meeting, and we discuss all the things that would be detrimental or beneficial, whether this shows that he's a suitable candidate or that he's unsuitable. So we have both aspects, the spiritual direction and formation advising, and both of those are full components of the man's formation here at the seminary.
David, I hope that was helpful to you. Thank you very, very much for that call. Right now we're having a store-wide sale. It's the fall store-wide sale. Hundreds of Catholic Answers books, CDs, and DVDs are available there at 20% off. You just enter the promo code CALive18 when you check out at shop.catholic.com to save 20% off hundreds of items in our online store. Visit shop.catholic.com today and begin saving. Be sure to enter that promo code CALive18 at checkout to save.
Catch Catholic Answers live anytime at Catholic.com.
Why do we need Catholic radio? Because not everybody's sitting in front of a computer or watching their television set at home. How about when driving to work? Catholic radio's there for you. I may be a Catholic priest, but I'm still a student of the faith, and Catholic radio helps supply good material, whether it be a question and answer format show, whether it be a show itself on doctrine or theology. I myself, as a priest, am always learning.
Father Wade thinks Catholic radio is important. So should you.
We have a big problem. Our culture is dying, and souls are in danger of being lost. The answer is conversion to Jesus Christ in His church. St. Paul Street Evangelization is a Catholic organization, and we have hundreds of teams spreading the good news throughout the country. But we need your help. The harvest is great, but the laborers are few. Find out more and get involved today at streetevangelization.com. That's streetevangelization.com.
Welcome back to Catholic Answers Live. Father John Trigilio, our guest, and lots of folks on the line because it is open forum today. And you can ask any question about the Catholic faith if it's open forum. We go now to Mike in South Dakota, listening on 88.9 FM. Hi, Mike. You got a question for Father?
It's Mark. That's okay, though.
I took my glasses off, Mark, and so you became Mike.
I can see us Mark, too.
I apologize. Right before I went to you, I took my glasses off, and you became Mike. All right, Mark.
Call me anything but late for supper.
Fair enough.
I had a question on sin, confession, removal of guilt, temporal punishment, and what that means going forward. So, for example, I sin. I go to confession. I've been told the guilt is removed, which doesn't typically work for me, but I try. But I'm told the temporal punishment is still there. So what exactly is temporal punishment, and what am I expected to be getting punished with in the hereafter?
Okay, well, that's a fair question. When you commit a sin, you rupture the relationship you have with God because you're violating God's law and you're going against His will. And so when we sin, there's a consequence to that sin. Not only do we incur guilt that we did something wrong, but then there is temporal punishment. So, for instance, when I was a kid and I didn't listen to my dad, he said, don't play baseball in the house, and I did, and the window got broke. Okay, I had to say to my dad, I'm sorry. And then he said, okay, I forgive you, but then the window had to be fixed and had to be paid for. And my temporal punishment meant that I had to raise the money to pay for that window. That out of justice, I owed that. Now, those are two different components. The one part, I had to admit my guilt, and then my father forgave me. But then forgiveness doesn't mean that what happened is undone. The window had to be replaced, and it's proper that the person who broke it somehow fix it or pay for it in some way. And likewise, when we commit a sin, we go to confession, and the shame, the guilt is removed. Even though you may not feel that, the person who's offended is God. He's the one who can only. He's the only one that can forgive us. We can't. We don't forgive ourselves. We didn't go against ourselves. We went against God. We offended Him. So He forgives us. But then justice has to be served, and therefore there's temporal punishment either in this life or in the life to come, and we call that purgatory. So somehow we pay for our sins here, or we pay for it there. But the penalty for sin is separate from the guilt of sin, or the culpability of sin. Too many times people conflate the two of them, and they're separate issues, but they're connected, and that's why some people, we say you do your purgatory here on earth. Some people, through their enduring of suffering, they offer it up. They're actually expiating for the punishment due to sin.
Mark?
Okay. Okay. I've heard things, or either when I was in Catholic school, or maybe I read them later, but you hear anecdotal things like Jesus says, well, I don't know what you're talking about. What sin are you talking about? I already forgave you. So, I mean, that almost flies in the face a little bit of the temporal punishment part, but maybe
I look at it this way: let's say you robbed a bank, okay, the governor can pardon you, okay, but that doesn't make you innocent. You were still guilty of the crime, okay, and although you may be out of jail, you still owe restitution for the stuff that you took. So the fact that God forgives us and says, okay, I remit the eternal punishment, okay, so that you don't merit the pains of hell, that's eternal punishment. Temporal punishment is what we owe out of justice for doing something wrong, something bad. Eternal punishment is what happens when you commit a mortal sin, and then because of that, you deserve the fires of hell. God remits that when we go to confession and we confess our sins, but the temporal punishment is still owed out of justice because we've offended an all-good God by going against His will.
And Jim, thank you very much for that call. I'm going to move just because I want to get to everybody today. I don't want to leave anybody without getting their question addressed. Excuse me, that was Mark. I can't get Mark's name right. Well, Mark, I'm probably going to do a little extra time in purgatory for the way I've treated you today. But
yes.
Moving on to Jim in Indianapolis. You are up next, Jim. Your question for Father. No, Jim?
Hello.
Oh, hi, Jim.
Hello.
Hi. Are heaven, hell, and purgatory the only options? Why can't we just die and be gone?
Oh, you mean oblivion?
Sure.
Okay. Well, there are religions and philosophies that propose there is such a thing as you die and then you cease to exist. The Judeo-Christian religion, though, does not believe that because God created us in His own image and likeness, and God is eternal. So the soul that He created in us is also immortal. So the soul cannot die. So even though the body dies and decays, the soul is eternal, and we believe that in the resurrection of the dead, so that the body which was once dead is resurrected and restored. So we don't believe that there is, what some people think, there's no life after death. We believe that death is not the end, and that's proven by Jesus rising from the dead. The fact that He also raised Lazarus from the dead, and as Jesus said in the Scriptures, He's not the God of the dead, but God of the living, the God of Isaac, Jacob, and Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. That God is alive, and those people who were once alive are still alive in a full sense. It's just that their bodies are dead. So even the people in hell still exist. The people in heaven exist. The people in purgatory exist. So that's part of the Judeo-Christian religion. Others, don't believe that, but it would be go against logic to think that, well, if God creates a soul, there's nothing about the soul that can die. The soul is immaterial. A body can die because it has materiality to it, but a soul is pure spirit. So once the spirit's been created, you cannot uncreate it.
Jim, I'm sorry to do this to you. I have a feeling there might be a follow-up, but we got to keep moving because I want to get to everybody's question today. I hope that was helpful to you. Marianne, you are up next. I don't know where Marianne is, but you are up next. Marianne, your question for Father.
Hi, thank you so much. I just wanted, now I've got another question, but I know you're hurrying, so I'll be quick. When Mark just called and you were discussing the penance and the confession, isn't penance, the penance we do that the priest gives us, doesn't that remove the temporal punishment? And also, I know we can receive plenary indulgences, like by saying the rosary with a group or things like that.
Yes, the plenary, the indulgence removes or can remove the temporal punishment due to sin, but only what they call a plenary indulgence, which means you have no attachment whatsoever to any former venial sin. If it's not full plenary, then it becomes a partial indulgence, so some of that temporal punishment is remitted. Now, when you do your penance after you go to confession, that's not your temporal punishment. Okay, that's satisfaction you do for the sacrament, but that's why, because we still have what we call attachments to our sin. We may be sorry for our sins, but we still have some fond memories of those sins, and that has to be removed, and that's only removed by what we call temporal punishment.
Okay, awesome. And the second thing, thank you. The second thing is when a woman called earlier regarding the sins in the past, and it was regarding the healing family tree. I don't know, it raised a question when you said that I didn't commit those sins, so if my father did them or whatever. But it raised the question of when somewhere in the Bible it says the sins of the father will be visited upon the children. Is that just the effects of sin? Or?
Yeah, that's exactly right. That's the consequence of sin. So if the father commits a sin, the children are going to suffer from it, but they don't incur the guilt. Because remember, there was the man who was born blind, and they said to Jesus, was it his sin or his parents' sin that caused this? And Jesus made it clear that, it's not because of his parents. I mean, he's not going to be punished for a sin that his parents committed. There's consequences of sin, but not you don't incur the guilt, and you're not going to be punished for something you didn't do. So Jesus made that clear. But with that phrase you refer to, the sins of the father are visited upon the children, it means, if my dad robs a bank and he brings shame to the family, well, I'm affected by that because I'm his son. But I don't incur the guilt. I don't share in his guilt of that crime.
Thank you, Marianne. I hope that was helpful. Jim in Cupertino, California, listening on the Catholic Answers app. Jim, your question for Father.
Yeah, Father, it's kind of a weird question. The question is, can you have a funeral mass in a Catholic church and restrict attendance, make it by invitation only?
I would normally say no, because it's a public mass, it's a public celebration of the sacrament. But I do realize there may be concerns with security when some celebrity has a funeral or there's fear of terrorist attack. You may need to. One thing I think should never, ever be done, that you sell tickets for people to go to Mass for any other circumstances whatsoever. But even at papal Masses, they have tickets because they need crowd control. They need it for security purposes. So even though no one's turned away, so to speak, if you want to get closer to the Pope, you need a ticket. Okay, they don't cost anything. Likewise, if someone wants to go to a movie star's funeral, you could go, but doesn't necessarily mean you may be able to get inside the church. For security purposes, you have to stay outside. But under normal circumstances, a family cannot say, well, we want this to be a closed funeral under normal circumstances, because that would violate the nature of the sacrament.
Thanks very much.
Okay, Jim, thank you very, very much. I think we can get one in. Let's try Julie in Cedar City. Julie, you're going to have to be real quick with your question for Father.
Oh, okay. Well, it's a small question. Father, I just wanted to ask you if selfishness in a really bad form, like if you had a family member who, when he comes home, causes disruption, is that a sin or just like a personality issue?
Well, it's both, because if it's deliberate and intentional, to be selfish is sinful, because it goes against the commandment that we have to care for our neighbors, love of God and love of neighbor. So to be selfish, acts of selfishness are sinful. They're normally probably venial, but then they could also be mortal depending on the context. But I would say that they're usually sinful. But sin, it also implies that a person does this deliberately and freely and knowingly. So if one of those conditions is not met, I can foresee an instance where objectively it may be a sinful situation, but subjectively they don't incur guilt.
And Julie, we'll have to leave it there. Thank you so much for the quickness of that call. Father John Trigilio, may we have your blessing before we go?
Absolutely. Benedicat vos omnipotens Deus, Pater et Filius et Spiritus Sanctus. Amen.
Amen. Thank you, Father. And if you'd like to support fathers taking seminarians on a pilgrimage and support one of the seminarians who are not wealthy young men, they'll need your support if they're going to go. Just send us an email at radio@catholic.com and we'll get you in touch with Father. Tomorrow, Jason Everett will be here and Gloria Purvis. I always like it when we end the week with Gloria. I'm glad Gloria will be here tomorrow. Join us then on Catholic Answers Live.